Zizek says that Buddhism is a sociopathic religion.
Why?
Well,
Because there's no possession, you don't have to take any responsibility for anything in the material world.
Right. Yeah.
Is that right? I kind of just guessed that.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, not possession. It leads people to inaction.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, why not?
They're like,
I guess
nothing
it did
matters.
happen with the Japanese. You know, you did have people that were Zen practitioners, and then there was also that video of like a supposed Zen master in Israel that's giving instruction to the IDF on how to kill people and enjoy it.
Why?
I don't know, because I mean,
is he like the guy from Tibet doing that, or
no,
a Jewish guy that's
guy,
really good at Zen?
Well, yeah,
that is such a bullshit path for Jews. Yeah. They love doing that.
A lot of
middle-aged Jews will be like, they're like, oh, I'm very spiritual. I'm getting into the East recently. Yeah. Actually, yes.
But I don't know if Zen's really heavy on the reincarnation stuff, or even it's more that like Tibetan Indian style. I don't know what the terms for it are, but
I don't freaking know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you could say if like why I like to think about it, because then you don't really have to worry about time. It's like, oh, there's all these things I want to do. Half of them are just, oh, it would be nice if I had enough money to do this, provide this, and it's like, okay, well, maybe if I keep working this way, I'll be able to do that when I'm 55 years old, and I'm probably 20 years away from death. But then if you're like, oh, I have multiple, you can just come back and then start at zero.
Yeah, start at zero.
Yeah. And then spend another 55 years. It's called reincarnation capitalism.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that's a perfect example.
Well, it is
why, because it breeds, like being,
being beaten down by
nihilistic or whatever. If you are of the thinking that
you're gonna come back.
Well, that capitalism is evil, right? Let's say that's like an evil or immoral way to structure society.
Uh-huh.
And if you did believe in reincarnation, then it would be like, well, there's no such thing as wealth inequality, because you could just come back as somebody whose parents are rich.
Uh-huh.
You could just come back as, it's like this equalizer,
right?
Like a caste system, right? Like, isn't the whole, I don't really know anything about it, but isn't the whole idea is like if you were, what are those the unstinkables? What's the lowest one? The unsmellables.
The Ferengi.
The Ferengi. Well, that's the one above it.
What is it? Oh, the
Jedi are at the top.
The Jedi.
Right.
Well, the Jedi are like the priests.
And there's the baristas.
The baristas.
The baristas, and
yeah.
the Ferengi.
And then the poo people.
The poo-poo.
The poo-poo boys.
The poo guys.
The slumdog poo-poo boys.
Yeah, the porta-potty
and
guys.
the porta-potty
The porta-potty Hindus. And
porta-potty house.
And then below that is the unstinkables.
Yeah, unstinkables.
And then below that is like a cow, I guess.
Yeah, a cow.
And that's the most sacred animal.
Yeah.
And then the bottom animal is the stink bug.
The stink bug.
Yeah. What?
Nothing, dude.
Why did you make a silly face to the camera?
No, I just saw the light and it took my distracted me.
But you have a system like that where there's like, I guess, it's like, oh, if you do a good job in this life, then you can be reborn into this other class.
Yeah.
Which the classes are, I'm assuming, determined by like your material circumstances.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like okay, we have this fixed social strata, but the sense of justice is built into the idea of reincarnation. So in that way, it could be harmful.
Yeah, it's harmful because,
But it's only harmful if it's not real, which it could be.
Yeah, if it's a lie that you're telling your workers who are losing their arms because of your unsafe practices at your factory. At your factory.
Yeah. If you're not paying anybody and you're like, look,
listen,
I'm gonna be dead in 20 years. I'm coming back as a doo-doo guy. I know that.
I'm gonna be a doo-doo bug.
I'm gonna be a doo-doo bug. I'm coming back as a stink bug, brother. And I'm gonna be this little fucking just shit-eating bug. And you are gonna be a Ferengi.
Yeah. And I'm cheating on my wife right now because she's gonna come back as a woman that doesn't get cheated on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's gonna be all right next time.
Yeah, and the girl I'm cheating on her with, disgusting,
nasty.
But she's gonna be hot next time.
She's gonna be hot next
time. And
time.
guess who's trying to live in her pussy when they're a bug?
Yeah, and I'm trying to meet her when she's a baby, and I'm a bug. And I go, is that a pussy? Yeah. One day when I'm a bug and she's a baby, then we can truly be together.
Yes. Other than that, yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
I'll see you next
week. I enjoyed Adam not being Adam because it would have been such a.
We're splitting it up now. He does the premiums on Patreon.
Oh, interesting.
And I do the regulars. Yeah.
He does the premiums.
He does the premium podcast.
Gotcha.
And I do the regulars. Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
We needed a break. I feel
for sure. These are things that happen.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Mix it up a bit. You enjoyed him not being here.
Well, it was just nice. I like him, but it was this was a nice surprise.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different vibe because we will have to continue podcasting at least until the lease is up.
Right, which is 2028.
It's not that bad. I got a 2-year lease, but that's so I got another full year. I got 13 months. So
I got a year on my place in New York too.
Yeah,
the
studio over there.
Lewis came to.
Yeah, they asked me like, do you want to do a 5-year lease?
No, they're crazy with the leases.
Yeah.
They never want it to end.
Yeah.
They never want anything to end.
It's like, what do you think?
Because commercial real estate now is in such trouble. They just if they have you, they go, why not 7-year? Like
right.
It's crazy now.
Yeah.
They go, we don't want you to ever leave.
Hi there, how are you? On Christmas Eve 1962, American television was blessed with a bundle of joy. A gas station attendant named Gomer Pyle. Pretty sharp, huh? Played by an unknown young actor named Jim Nabors, Gomer debuted as Mayberry's friendly mechanic on The Andy Griffith Show. He lived in the back room of the filling station with no need for fancy comforts.
When I seen it in the snare, I took it right out and plucked it and cleaned it and set it right on the floor.
An uncomplicated man, he always greeted the world with a simple, wide-eyed wonder.
Yes, my grandma moves faster than that. Well, bless her heart.
By most standards, he was a sweet but unremarkable guy, not particularly adept at his job.
Me, I don't do no engine work.
But he had a hidden talent that none of his neighbors saw coming.
And as we gently roll, all things delight us.
Mayberry's mechanic had a hidden side, but that's nothing compared to the hidden side of the actor who portrayed him.
I really didn't ever think I'd make it.
Over his 55-year career, Jim Nabors cultivated a wholesome, folksy persona, from playing Gomer on multiple sitcoms, to appearing as himself on variety shows, to singing every year at the start of the Indianapolis 500. But behind the scenes, Jim Nabors harbored a secret that would have scandalized the country and ruined his career if it was ever found out. And in fact, it nearly did when rumors spread about his relationship with another closeted actor. Hey, I'm Matt. I make videos about pop culture, and this time I want to tell you the story of Jim Nabors, a scandalous fake marriage that nearly ended his career, and a real-life romance that was kept secret for decades. Jim Nabors was born in June of 1930 in a little Alabama town called Sylacauga. He was the youngest of 5 siblings, and it was the middle of the Great Depression. His family didn't have much.
We lived in a 3-room house, and my grandmother lived with us.
The family raised their own chickens for food. His mother worked at a truck stop, his father worked odd jobs like unloading freight, and eventually his dad got appointed as the town's police officer. Sylacauga was so small that Jim's father was the only police officer in town, and he seldom even bothered to arrest people.
Oh, no, he didn't put them in jail, he just took them home. Everybody loved my daddy, everybody.
Even from a young age, Jim stood out from his older siblings. He had debilitating asthma, and he couldn't play with the other kids.
Because I remember, looking into their face when they would be over me, and I couldn't breathe.
Jim spent a lot of his childhood years indoors, in particular, going to movie theaters, where he developed a love of big Hollywood musicals.
And my dad would always be able to manage to find me a dime to go to the theater, and it went up to 15 cents.
As he got older, Jim's obsession with movies developed into an urge to perform whenever he could.
And then he would sing at home and play the piano. And Ruth and I said, Mother, make him hush.
He sang in Glee Club, he learned to play the clarinet, he performed at plays, he entered dance contests, he loved to be the center of attention.
I took up dancing, jitterbugging, and things like that.
There was another aspect that set him apart, one that he couldn't share. Even as a child, Jim knew that he was gay, but in the deep south of the 1930s and 40s, it just wasn't something he could talk about. At the time, homosexuality was seen as a crime and a sickness. People tried to cure it with electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and weird medical experiments like monkey testicle implants. But there was one place where homosexuality was tolerated, celebrated even, and that was enclaves in big cities like New York and Los Angeles. Jim was born at the start of the pansy craze, a period where gay culture, bars, and drag shows flourished in big cities. If you wanted to live comfortably as a queer person, a big city was your best bet. And even though the pansy craze only lasted a couple of years, when it was over, there were still sizable gay enclaves in major cities. Like a lot of young people then and now, Jim dreamed of growing up and escaping from his small town. He clearly had a gift for entertaining, and he wanted to pursue a showbiz career.
Even way back then, it sort of triggered my fantasy of becoming maybe a performer.
So with dreams of seeing his name in lights, naturally, when it came time to enroll in college, he went with business administration.
Growing up in a small town in Alabama, in your wildest dreams, if you even ever told anybody that you were thinking about going to Hollywood, they would have laughed me right out of town.
But even as he was studying business, Jim couldn't stay out of the limelight. He'd show up at nightclubs and get up on stage to sing. He appeared in comedy shows in college. Even when he went out with friends, he'd wind up performing.
Before the night was over, they'd have Jimmy up, and he would start out singing Hillbilly, and then he'd go into opera.
For a lot of queer people, learning to be funny or entertaining could be a form of defense, a way to get people to like you instead of turning on you. And for Jim, it was a way to develop a public persona that everybody liked.
Sing like this and talk like this, and it was a total dichotomy, but it sort of helped me develop a character.
After he graduated, Jim decided he had to at least give showbiz a shot. So he moved to New York to try to get onto Broadway. But he was so southern that nobody knew what to do with him. On one occasion, he went to an audition in a producer's hotel room dressed in clothes that his mother had sent from Alabama.
And I leaped into the room. Lord God, how you doing there? Well, they thought I had escaped from a mental institution, and they never did give me a chance to audition or anything. It just ushered me right out of their apartment.
His bad audition seemed to confirm that he wasn't cut out for showbiz. Jim struggled to find a job and make ends meet, and eventually he got a job as a secretary at the UN. That didn't work well either.
And so I'd answer the phone, Secretary General's office. Well, they would try out different languages on me, never knowing I was speaking English.
Not only had he failed to break into showbiz, people in New York couldn't even understand him. Before long, he was out of money, and he had to move back to the South. He took a job editing film for a local news station, where he was paid $65 a week. His dreams of being a performer, it seemed, would always be just that, dreams. But things were rough for him in the South, too. His asthma started to get worse.
It was still the weather, the climate. And he decided that he would go west.
He'd heard the air was better on the West Coast, so he and his sister got in a car and started driving from Alabama to California. As they got closer to the Pacific Coast, Jim realized something incredible had happened. For the first time in his life, he could breathe.
We were in New Mexico. I suddenly got pulled off the side of the road, and tears were streaming down my face. And I didn't realize I was crying. And I said, it's the first time I've ever been able to take a full breath.
Jim got to LA in 1958 and landed a job as an editor at NBC. He used the money he earned to help support his family back home.
He sent my mother and my sister and me a string of pearls. And he sent my daddy a $100 bill. He was so proud of that.
What his family didn't know is that Jim was barely making ends meet. During his first year in LA, he lived in a one-room apartment. He didn't tell anyone, but some weeks he couldn't afford food and was literally starving. But he never let on to his family or his friends. By day, he worked at NBC, and by night, he'd perform at a nightclub in Santa Monica called The Horn, telling jokes and singing. Word started to get around L.A. about the guy who combined a country accent and operatic arias.
I'd sing and then talk like this, and people didn't know what I did.
One night, he got an invitation to appear on The Steve Allen Show. Steve Allen was the first host of The Tonight Show, and he helped launch the careers of a bunch of comedians. This could be Jim's big break.
And my mother said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to sing this operatic aria. And there was silence on the other end of the phone. My mother said, you can't sing.
Viewers loved him. After that, Jim decided to take a chance on breaking into showbiz one more time, and he quit his day job to focus on comedy clubs. For a while, he worked alongside other emerging comics like Jonathan Winters and Bob Newhart and Woody Allen. And one night, he happened to get up on stage at the Horn in Santa Monica when Andy Griffith, star of the Andy Griffith Show, was in the audience.
I'll never forget what he said to me after the show. He said, I don't know what you do, but you do it very well.
On his show, Andy Griffith played the sheriff of a tiny little southern town. He was looking to expand the cast, and he thought that Jim's southern drawl and friendly persona would be a perfect fit. So they brought Jim on for a one-episode appearance as a gas station attendant. Jim had a lot riding on this. He was still brand new to professional acting. Up until now, he had only ever performed for friends and in little nightclubs, and had only been on TV once. The Andy Griffith Show was watched by 13 to 14 million people. It was one of the most popular shows in the country. With no full-time job and almost no money to his name, this was a make-or-break opportunity.
The first day on the set, Andy announced to everybody that I had never worked or had never acted or done anything like that. And he says, so y'all be patient with him.
Jim's episode aired on December 24th, 1962, and audiences loved him. Producers quickly arranged to make him regular, bringing him back for 5 more episodes that season and 17 episodes the next season. I think what works so well with Gomer is that the Andy Griffith Show's whole vibe was of a tiny southern town, which is exactly where Jim had grown up, the son of a real-life small-town sheriff. Jim could just draw on his childhood to bring Gomer to life.
Gomer, that was just beautiful.
Oh, it's just caterwauling.
Producers realized pretty quickly that they could incorporate Jim's incredible voice into the Gomer character as well, and that's what really set him apart.
As you did once long ago.
The cast used to tour with a live version of the show, and Andy recalled the reaction that Jim would get when he came out to sing.
The band hit and that boy started to sing, and you could feel the hair rising on everybody in that audience. And I walked out back on the stage, and they'd boo me every night.
Even though viewers loved him, behind his back, not everyone was so nice. With close friends, Jim was open about being gay, and unlike other closeted actors of the time, he never pretended to date women. So as he gained fame, that meant unwanted attention. There's an account of how Jim was treated on The Andy Griffith Show in a book by Ron Howard. These days, you might know Ron as the narrator on Arrested Development, or as the director of The Da Vinci Code and the Han Solo movie, but back then, little Ronnie Howard played Opie, Andy's son. Ron's parents were close friends with Jim Nabors, and Ron once asked them why the crew called Jim names. Here's an excerpt from Ron's book. "Dad," I said one day, "what is a homo?" He instantly understood the context, and he offered his usual plain-spoken response. "Jim is attracted to men instead of women," Dad said, "and they call that homosexuality." This was my introduction to the very concept of queerness. Mayberry was a small town, but for those of us who actually spent our days there, it contained the whole of human experience. It was honestly pretty risky for Jim to be open at all in the 1960s. This was still pre-Stonewall, and even though Jim was living in a city with some more tolerance for gays than the Deep South, it was still commonplace for queer people to be arrested. Even for an ordinary citizen, being outed could mean losing your job, your home, getting cut off from your family. Now that Jim was becoming nationally known, he faced extra scrutiny. Gay actors, when they were found out, typically never worked again. For example, in the 1930s, silent film star William Haynes was blacklisted from movies when he refused to stay in the closet. In the 1950s, a tabloid threatened to out leading man Rock Hudson, so he married his agent's secretary so he could deny the rumors. The same year that Jim joined the Andy Griffith Show, there was a nationwide rumor that homosexuals were secretly working to undermine the State Department. And closer to home, there was an effort that year to stamp out homosexuality in Hollywood, led by the LA City Council and LAPD. Jim had finally landed the role of a lifetime on one of the most popular shows on television. But it would all have been over in an instant if the public found out that their beloved Gomer Pyle was played by a gay man. For the time being, even though it was an open secret on set, the viewers remained blissfully unaware, and Jim's star continued to rise. Producers could tell they had something good on their hands.
Everybody knew by then Jim could sing. And I went in Aaron's office and I said, Aaron, we better do something for Jim Neighbors because he's about to bust out and somebody's going to if we don't.
CBS wanted to keep him around, so they came up with a new show for him. And even though he was popular, this was still a big gamble by the network. Jim was still very new to showbiz, and he'd only been a side character. Now they were talking about centering a whole new series around him.
I almost fainted, when they wanted to do a spinoff with me.
On May 18th, 1964, The Andy Griffith Show aired an episode in which Gomer leaves Mayberry to join the Marines, an episode that served as a backdoor pilot for his new series, Gomer Pyle USMC, which joined the regular CBS lineup a few months later. In the span of just 2 years, Jim had gone from an obscure novelty nightclub act to a major TV star.
Starring Jim Neighbors as Gomer Pyle.
Every episode involved Gomer causing sitcom mayhem on a military base. There was always a reason for him to break out into song.
Sing, Pyle.
But Sergeant, I just...
Pyle singing, that's an order.
Just a...
From the very first episode, the gamble on giving Jim his own show paid off. The Gomer Pyle Show was as big a hit as Andy Griffith, even beating it in the ratings some years. One reason? It was a show about the military in the late 1960s that never acknowledged the Vietnam War. It was an escape from the real-life horrors on the news, a return to a simpler time. Here's how producer Aaron Rubin responded when people suggested that the show deal with current events.
You're not going to go to Vietnam and show body bags and get laughs out of that. When you say escapism, pure escapism, of course.
The closest they ever came to being topical was an episode where Gomer meets some hippies. And by the way, do you recognize the hippie with the long hair?
How many seas must the white dove sail?
That's Rob Reiner, meathead on All in the Family, director of The Princess Bride, and many years later, one of the main funders of the lawsuit that legalized gay marriage in California. Jim played Gomer for the better part of a decade, but by the late 60s, he was ready to try something new. In 1968, he told CBS that he wanted to leave the show. He was a big moneymaker for the network, so executives were not thrilled, but Jim insisted, and he had enough clout by that point that he could call the shots. CBS created a new show for him, a variety show where he could showcase more of his talents and bring on his performer friends every week.
From now on, it's so long, Gomer. Hey, Jim Neighbors.
With a variety format, he could work with any performer he wanted to. Comedy stars like Phyllis Diller, movie stars like Debbie Reynolds, and emerging musical acts.
Ladies and gentlemen, my friends, the Jackson 5.
That was the Jacksons' first appearance on national television. Jim had a ton of truly great guests on his show. I've collected some of my favorites into a bonus video that I'm posting on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/mattbaum to check that out. So once again, Jim's show was a hit. Not as big as a sitcom, but still with ratings consistently in the top 30. It was on this show that Jim formed a friendship with another variety show star working the next stage over.
The connection between studios was the men's room and the ladies' room. So I'd just run through the ladies' room and go over on his set and watch what he was doing at the time and vice versa.
Jim and Carol Burnett became close friends and appeared on each other's shows many times over the years. Carol actually wound up saving Jim's life many years later, and we'll get to that in just a bit. But for the time being, they became fast friends. You can often see them making each other crack up.
I didn't have...
Boss, you may fire me for this.
But another of Jim's guests wound up turning into a big problem. Rock Hudson was a huge film star, appearing in some of the biggest hits of the 50s and 60s. During that time, he narrowly managed to avoid being outed, and behind the scenes, he and Jim spent a lot of time together. They vacationed together, they went to the theater. I've never seen any evidence that they were anything more than friends. But in the early 70s, a rumor started to circulate that they were not only romantically involved, but secretly married. It's hard to say how that got started. According to Rock Hudson, a group of gay men in Huntington Beach sent out party invitations with a joke line about Rock marrying Jim, taking the last name of Jim's character, so he'd be Rock Pyle. However it began, in the spring of 1971, the rumor got out of hand. It was picked up by gossip magazines, repeated by radio DJs, even parodied in Mad Magazine. Back then, a rumor like that could have easily ended Rock and Jim's careers, especially since, at its heart, there was a little kernel of truth. Both actors really were gay. But because of the intense stigma of the time, they had to deny everything. Rock gave interviews where he said that none of it was true. Jim's people arranged interviews in gossip magazines about what a ladies' man he was. The two friends even had to stop working and spending time together. Rock later spoke about how much it hurt, but they had to end their friendship in order to protect their careers. Eventually, the rumor died down, but the damage had been done. A few months later, Jim's variety show, one of the top-rated shows on television, was quietly canceled. It's hard to say for certain that the rumors directly caused the cancellation. CBS canceled a lot of its southern and rural-themed sitcoms that year. Andy Griffith, Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, Lassie, Petticoat Junction, Hee Haw, all gone. The country was going through a massive cultural upheaval, from the civil rights movement to political unrest over Vietnam to shifting demographics in cities and suburbs. For years, most of CBS's programming refused to reflect those changes, and the network increasingly looked like it was stuck in the past. So, in 1971, the head of CBS, Robert Wood, wiped out all of the rural shows, a move that became known as the Rural Purge.
Roger.
As one of the actors from Green Acres put it, CBS canceled everything with a tree, including Lassie. For decades after, there were almost no new sitcoms set in the South. That's probably one reason why Designing Women feels so different from other shows in the 1980s, when it would have fit right in on CBS prior to 1971. Jim's variety show wasn't that rural, but he had a southern accent, and he was still closely associated with Gomer and Andy Griffith. That, plus the rumors that had been circulating about his homosexuality for years, likely contributed to the cancellation. Now, there is an upside to the Rural Purge, which is that it opened the door to more modern shows on CBS. All in the Family, MASH, The Bob Newhart Show, Mary Tyler Moore, The Jeffersons. They were generally more diverse and tended to show women in more positions of power. And not only that, but all of those shows featured episodes with queer characters, most of which I've talked about elsewhere on this channel. This was a huge shift from the older shows that avoided controversial topics, from a show like Gomer Pyle that ignored the Vietnam War, to a show like MASH that satirized the U.S. military. So I think, on balance, the Rural Purge was necessary for TV to keep up with changing culture. Still, it was a rough time for Jim.
It does drag you down tremendously.
After losing his show, Jim's future was a little unclear. Was that it? He had a good run, maybe it was over? At first, he headed out on the road to do some live shows in Las Vegas, Reno, and figure out what came next. What came next were his friends, who stepped up and made sure to cast him in their projects. Carol Burnett brought him onto her show for the first episode of every new season. She told people he was a good luck charm.
Well, I was thinking how much fun it'd be to do a musical.
Sonny and Cher cast him on their show.
Hi, Sailor, you new in town?
Julie Andrews on hers.
Jim, where are your teeth?
He was in almost every movie that his friend Burt Reynolds made.
He's got a lot of influence out there.
His episode of The Muppet Show is particularly good. This is also when Jim started what would become his longest-running gig, singing at the start of the Indianapolis 500 every year. It started in 1972 with an invitation so last-minute he had to write the lyrics on his hand. And then he was invited back the next year, and the year after, and became an annual tradition for literally decades. As it turns out, Jim didn't need to worry about a show being canceled. His friends stood by him and kept him booked and busy through the 70s and into the 80s. And then in the early 90s, Jim's friends went even further by saving his life. It was a few weeks before Christmas in 1993, and Jim felt himself slowing down. He was tired all the time. He didn't know why. His skin was losing its color, his eyes were sunken, his limbs were starting to swell. When he went to get medical care, a doctor ordered him to go to the Mayo Clinic right away. And that's when he found out that his liver had almost completely shut down due to hepatitis B infection. He needed a liver transplant right away, or else he'd only have a few months left to live.
He was just so near death. Some of it I've just went over my head.
The first person Jim told was his sister when they gathered for Christmas. The second person was his friend Carol Burnett.
I mean, it did not look good. And I just said, I'm not going to lose you.
Carol leapt into action, making calls and researching liver specialists.
He didn't want me to tell anybody, but I did.
She says the best guy in the world for this transplant thing is at UCLA, and I've just talked to him and so forth, and says they're waiting for your call.
The doctor's name was Gary Gitnick, an internationally renowned gastroenterologist, and he took Neighbors on as a patient. Dr. Gitnick saw that Neighbors was otherwise in great health. He lived pretty clean, never getting to drugs or alcohol, and he put Jim on an organ donor list. Still, there was no guarantee he'd be picked. Matches were made by a computer algorithm that only looked at factors like blood type and antigens and distance. Now Jim just had to stay healthy long enough to find a solid match.
When you're waiting for a transplant, you can't in good conscience pray for one, because someone has to die for you to live.
For the next few weeks, Jim's friends from all over the world flew to his side to look after him. He was looked after by Dom DeLuise, Marilyn Horne, Phyllis Diller, and Florence Henderson.
He was really on his last legs. Jim looked like it was over.
Then, late one night in February, the call came. They found a match. Jim went into surgery the next day. He went under not knowing if he'd survive the operation. And as he came around, he says the first thing he heard was a nurse saying, "You're going to be fine." That started a long recovery process. Jim had a home in Hawaii, and he retired there to take care of himself and recuperate. For a long time, he stepped out of the public eye, except for one regular gig every year, coming back to sing at the Indy 500.
It is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Jim Neighbors. Back home again.
Then in 2013, Jim found himself back in the headlines.
Actor Jim Neighbors, who's lived in Hawaii for more than 40 years, married his longtime male partner earlier this month.
Just after marriage equality was legalized in Washington state, Jim married his partner, Stan Cadwallader, at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in Seattle.
I'm 82 and he's in his 60s and we've been together for 38 years.
Stan was a firefighter when they met in 1975, and for decades, as Jim was appearing on variety shows, singing at live shows, even fighting for his life, only close friends and family knew about Stan. They kept their relationship out of the public eye for nearly 40 years.
I'm not ashamed of people knowing. It's just that it was such a personal thing. I didn't tell anybody. I've never made a huge secret of it at all.
And I can't really blame them for protecting their privacy. When they first met, it was just a few years after the rumors spread about Jim and rock and forced the two friends to stop spending time together. In the 1970s, if word had spread about Jim's relationship, his actual relationship with the real love of his life, it would have almost certainly ended both Jim and Stan's careers. And it's possible the stigma of the time would have come between them, forcing them to distance themselves from each other for their own protection. As difficult as it must have been, their secrecy probably protected them until they finally felt safe enough to tell the world.
It's pretty obvious that we have no rights as a couple. I just said, well, at my age, it's probably the best thing to do.
So how'd the world respond? Joyfully, with open arms. Fans around the world congratulated the happy couple. They got a lovely profile in the local paper, and the news even appeared in his hometown Alabama newspaper, where the verdict was that the couple was very sweet. Jim passed away peacefully in his sleep in 2017 at the age of 87. He outlived the days when rumors of a marriage nearly ended his career, and finally celebrated his real-life love story without any fear. In 2014, 1 year after Jim and Stan married, Jim was invited back to sing at the Indy 500 one more time before he retired from the gig for good.
Thank you, Jim. We love you. We'll miss you. And we'll never forget you.
Jim left us so many funny appearances and amazing performances. I've gathered some of the best, including some goofy outtakes, in bonus videos over on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/MattBaum to watch that and hours more bonus videos. Big thanks to everybody who makes these videos possible. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to be discussing Gomer with Homer.
Hi, y'all! Shout Sam!
Just Sam.
Stop remembering TV and get back to work. I didn't have no million people out there marching and protesting to get me my job.
No, his uncle got it for him.
In January of 1971, CBS shocked the country with a sitcom unlike anything Americans had ever seen.
Pull that skate down. Every time you sit down on one of them